Thank you, Doug, and thank you, Yasir, and I'm honored by the invitation to speak to you. When we saw the pictures of other events, I saw some of my colleagues from Detroit, and I hope I can live up to the bar that they set. So, altruism is not an easy concept to talk about from the point of view of Judaism. So I think what I'm going to do is stir things up a little bit, and maybe the next two speakers will recover a little bit from the mess that I make. What I'm going to argue, at least initially, is that altruism is not a Jewish concept. And my argument is based on the definition of altruism, a practice of unselfish concern to the devotion to the welfare of others, a doctrine that the correct action is that which produces the greatest benefit to other people. I'm going to argue it's not a Jewish value because it is by definition unlimited. You can't be a little bit altruistic. That's not altruism. And if it's unlimited, contrast it with with generosity, for example. I'll come back to generosity later, or compassion later. When you're generous, we can define generous as giving, say, 15 to 20% of your income, and then you've achieved generosity. How do you achieve altruism? That's the fundamental problem. I'll give you another example. Story from rabbinic literature, 1st, 2nd century or so. Two men are in the middle of a desert. They have one jug of water. If one of them drinks the water, that one will survive. He'll get to the next oasis. If they share the water, they'll both die. Now, what's the altruistic thing to do? I have the water. My friend Doug doesn't have water. I want to be altruistic, so I give Doug the water. If Doug wants to be altruistic, he's going to turn around and give me the water back. And we're just going to stand there passing this water back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until we both die. It doesn't work. So Rabbi Akiva says what you do is you drink the water. And your life takes precedence over the life of the other. So, turn the slide. There are two Jewish concepts I want to give you, Yetzer HaTov and Yetzer HaRa. Sometimes they're translated as the good inclination and the evil inclination, but I want to, as I always do, say that that's the wrong way to understand them. The Yetzer HaTov is the altruistic inclination, and the Yetzer HaRa is exactly the opposite. That's the selfish inclination. So rabbinic literature says that were it not for the Yetzer HaRa, we would not get married, we wouldn't build houses, right? We wouldn't do all of those things that are actually very selfish. It's very selfish for me to want to wear warm clothing when I could better give away my money to somebody who doesn't have clothing, right? But were it not for that selfish impulse, I would die. So, because I really like Star Trek, I'm going to turn to the next slide and watch a 1-minute clip of a original series Star Trek episode. This illustrates Yetzer HaTov and Yetzer HaRa better than anything I've ever seen.
The malfunction of the ship's transporter, an unexplained duplicate of myself exists.
What can I do for you, Jim?
I said give me the brandy.
Come on, Spark, I know that look. What is it?
Well, our good doctor said that you were acting like a wild man.
Oh, Captain. You started hurting me. I defied you. Fisher saw you too.
It wasn't me.
It was you, sir.
I got a kid! I got a kid!
So I'm going to spoil the end for you a little bit. This is an episode worth seeing. What happens in the end is they discover that the Kirk, who is the Yetzer Hara, the violent one, the one who has all of these impulses, including a very strong sex drive, will die if he remains separate from the nice, gentle Kirk, the one who is kind to everybody, but the one who, as the show progresses, they discover he has lost his leadership ability. He can't function. And either of them alone will die. So this is the Jewish value. The altruistic impulse, the selfish impulse alone can't survive. You need to combine them, and you need to combine them with balance. So let me now move to the other thing we're talking about tonight, which is compassion. This is a Jewish value. Compassion, Gimilut Chasadim, is the Hebrew phrase for doing acts of loving kindness. If we're talking about compassion in times of trouble, just giving you a handful of verses from Jewish sources. Love your fellow, love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord, from Leviticus. Hillel's reformulation is a very interesting reformulation. If we're talking about this alone, we could spend 10 minutes just talking about how Hillel's reformulation is different than that of Jesus. What is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. Leviticus 25, do not wrong one another, but fear your Lord. So these are instructions to take care of people around us. The next slide from Leviticus 25, later on in the chapter, is precisely what we're talking about today. What happens if somebody is in trouble, loses his property, loses his house? We have a responsibility to help that person, the nearest family member in biblical society. The nearest family member had an obligation to step in, pay off the debt, redeem the property, give the property back, give him or her the home back. And then Hillel, again, the first century before the Common Era sage, Hillel, do not judge your fellow until you are in his place. Right? You can't really understand the other person until you're faced with the same set of circumstances. This idea of compassion not only is compassion in terms of financial support for those who need, but the concept has been transferred into the way we speak. The Hebrew phrase is lashon hara, gossip, tale-bearing. That sort of behavior is under the same rubric of being careful with what kind of language we use. Spreading rumors, spreading gossip, destroying somebody's reputation, all that comes out of these texts on compassion and on how we treat our neighbor. So, the summary, in Judaism, the action of mitzvah is the centerpiece of what it means to be a Jew. So the action of the mitzvot of generosity, of compassion, is embedded in the daily liturgy as a reminder that each morning we should practice, a reminder each morning that we should practice compassion during the day. The early part of the liturgy talks about various acts of God, where God clothed the naked, thinking of the Adam and Eve story. God visited the sick, thinking of Abraham after his circumcision. God fed the hungry. And it goes through a list of ways that God interacts with the world as a message to us as we're waking up in the morning and beginning to set out on our day, that that's the standard of behavior, the command, the mitzvah, the practice, to treat the world and ourselves with generosity and with compassion. So,